Okay, let's see if this works. Hi, am I live? I think I'm live. Well, hi everyone. Long time no see. If things sound a bit weird, it's because, oh, is that lag? Is that lag? Is that lag? Am I audible? I have no idea what's going on at this point. But I'm going to act as if everything is fine. I'm procrastinating on a bunch of finals work right now. So I figured the best way to go about procrastinating would be to do a mini revisitation of the Cozy Corner series and maybe do some Barthes. And for anyone watching this actively in Philbook, if you could just slide into the comments really quickly and let me know that the stream is fine and that there's no lag or anything. Latency is being weird. But tonight we are going to be reading The World of Wrestling and Of Wine and Milk. The World of Wrestling. The grandiloquent truth of gestures on life's great occasions. Baudelaire. The virtue of all in wrestling is that it is the spectacle of excess. Here we find a grandiloquence, which must have been that of ancient theaters. Oh my gosh, this speaks to my WWE heart. And in fact, wrestling is an open-air spectacle for what makes the circus or the arena. What that they are is not the sky, a romantic value rather suited to fashionable occasions. It is the drenching and vertical quality of the flood of light. Even hidden in the most squalid Parisian halls, wrestling partakes of the nature of the great solar spectacles, Greek drama, and bullfights. In both, a light without shadow generates an emotion without reserve. There are people who think that wrestling is an ignoble sport. Wrestling is not a sport, it is a spectacle, and it is no more ignoble to attend to a wrestled performance of suffering than a performance of the sorrows of Arnulf or Andromache. Of course, there exists a false wrestling, in which the participants unnecessarily go to great lengths to make a show of a fair fight. This is of no interest. True wrestling, wrongly called amateur wrestling, is performed in second-rate halls where the public spontaneously attunes itself to the spectacular nature of the contest, like the audience at a suburban cinema. Then these same people wax indignant because wrestling is a stage-managed sport, which ought, by the way, to mitigate its ignominy. The public is completely uninterested in knowing whether the contest is rigged or not, and rightly so, it abandons itself to the primary virtue of the spectacle, which is to abolish all motives and all consequences. What matters is not what it thinks, but what it sees. What new tip? Facebook Live. Okay, I'm worthy sharing to a group Facebook Live. This public knows very well that the distinction between wrestling and boxing, and knows that boxing is a Jansenist sport based on a demonstration of excellence. One can bet on the outcome of a boxing match. With wrestling, it would make no sense. A boxing match is a story which is constructed before the eyes of the spectator. In wrestling, on the contrary, it is each moment which is intelligible, not the passage of time. The spectator is not interested in the rise and fall of fortunes. He expects the transient image of certain passions. Wrestling therefore demands an immediate reading of the juxtaposed meanings so that there is no need to connect them. The logical conclusion of the contest does not interest the wrestling fan. Well, on the contrary, a boxing match always implies the signs of the future. In other words, wrestling is a sum of spectacles of which no single one is a function. Each moment imposes the total knowledge of a passion which arises erect and alone, without ever extending to the crowning moment of a result. Thus, the function of the wrestler is not to win, it is to go exactly through the motions which are expected of him. It is said that judo contains a hidden symbolic aspect even in the midst of efficiency. Its gestures are measured, precise but restricted, drawn accurately but by a stroke without volume. Wrestling, on the contrary, offers excessive gestures, exploited to the limit of their meaning. In judo, a man who is down is hardly down at all. He rolls over, he draws back, he eludes defeat, or if the latter is obvious, he immediately disappears. Am I running? I think I'm running. A man who's down is exaggeratedly so, and completely fills the eyes of the spectators with the intolerable spectacle of his powerlessness. This function of grandiloquence is indeed the same as of ancient theatre, whose principle, language, and props, masks and buskins, concurred in the exaggeratedly visible explanation of a necessity, the gesture of the vanquished wrestler signifying to the world a defeat which, far from disguising, he emphasizes and holds like a pause in music, corresponds to the mask of antiquity meant to signify the tragic mode of the spectacle. In wrestling, as on the stage in antiquity, one is not ashamed of one's suffering. One knows how to cry. One has a liking for tears. God, this is so gay. I love it. Each sign in wrestling is therefore endowed with an absolute clarity, since one must always understand everything on the spot. As soon as the adversaries are in the ring, the public is overwhelmed with the obviousness of the roles. As in the theater, each physical type expresses to excess the part which has been assigned to the contestant. Thalvin, a 50-year-old with an obese and sagging body, whose type of asexual hideousness always inspires feminine nicknames, displays in his flesh the characters of baseness, for his part is to represent what, in the classical concept of the salod, the bastard, the key concept of any wrestling match. Hold on one moment. Okay, so that isn't... My computer was doing something weird. The key concept of any wrestling match appears as organically repugnant. The nausea voluntarily provoked by Thalvin shows therefore a very extended use of signs. Not only is ugliness used here in order to signify baseness, but in addition ugliness is wholly gathered into a particularly repulsive quality of matter, the pallid collapse of dead flesh. The public calls Thalvin la barbac, stinking meat, so that the passionate condemnation of the crowd no longer stems from its judgment. No feet. No feet. No feet for you. I forgive you, Will. My feet are expensive and belong to paramours, I suppose, so that the passionate condemnation of the crowd no longer stems from its judgment, but instead from the very depths of its humors. It will thereafter let itself be frenetically embroiled in an idea of Thalvin which will conform entirely with this physical origin. His actions will perfectly correspond to the essential viscosity of his personage. It is therefore the body of the wrestler that we find the first key to the contest. I know from the start that all of Thalvin's actions, his treacheries, cruelties, and acts of cowardice will not fail to measure up to the first image of ignobility he gave me. I can trust him to carry out intelligently, and to the last detail, all the gestures of a kind and amorphous baseness, and thus fill to the brim the image of the most repugnant bastard there is, the bastard octopus. That's my wrestling name. Wrestlers therefore have a physique as peremptory as those of the characters of the Commedia dell'arte who display in advance in their costumes and attitudes the future contents of their parts. Just as Pantalon can never be anything but a ridiculous cuckold, Harlequin an astute servant, and the doctor stupid pedant, in the same way Thavan will never be anything but an ignoble traitor. Renier, a tall blond fellow with a limp body and unkempt hair, the moving image of passivity, Mazod, short and arrogant like a cock, that of grotesque conceit, and Orsano, an effeminate teddy boy, first seen in blue and pink dressing gowns. That doubly harmonious of a vindictive salope or bitch, for I do not think that the public of the Elysee Montmartre, like Lichla, believes the word salope to be masculine. The physique of the wrestlers therefore constitutes a basic sign, which like a seed contains the whole fight. But this seed proliferates, for it is at every turn during the fight, in each new situation, that the body of the wrestler casts to the public the magical entertainment of a temperament which finds its natural expression in a gesture. The different strata of meaning throw light on each other and form the most intelligible of spectacles. Wrestling is like a diacritic writing, above the fundamental meaning of his body. The wrestler arranges comments which are episodic but always opportune, and constantly help the reading of the fight, by means of gestures, attitudes, and mimicry which make the intention utterly obvious. Sometimes the wrestler triumphs with a repulsive sneer while kneeling on the good sportsman. That's a good question, Ricardo. I don't know. I think so. I'm doing so. One of the reasons I'm interrupting every now and again to switch windows or check something is this is my first time doing a stream using an actual streaming software. So it's a bit hinky. So hence why I'm asking if there's a lag or if there's a latency delay or what have you. But that's, if it's showing as flipped, that's why it's flipped. Yeah, my apartment didn't just suddenly simulacra itself. Sometimes the wrestler triumphs with a repulsive sneer while kneeling on the good sportsman. Sometimes he gives the crowd a conceited smile which forebodes an early revenge. Sometimes, pinned to the ground, he hits the floor ostentatiously to make evident to all the intolerable nature of his situation. Sometimes he erects a complicated set of signs. Oh, no, I'm not reading right to left. It'd be really cool if I could. I'm not that autistic. No. If I were doing Arabic live, yes, but my Arabic is terrible. Sometimes he erects a complicated. I just keep imagining Roland Barthe just puzzling himself over man in banana hammocks on the WWE network of today. Just these vivacious, endowed men in their jock straps, their colorful jock straps, and he's just like signs. And sometimes he erects a complicated set of signs meant to make the public understand that he legitimately personifies the ever-entertaining image of the grumbler, endlessly confabulating about his displeasure. Thanks, Rodrigo. We are therefore dealing with a real human comedy, capital H, capital C, human comedy, with the most socially inspired nuances of passion, conceit, rightfulness, refined cruelty, a sense of paying one's debts, always felicitously, fatefully, that's the word. Find the clear sign which can revive them, receive them, express them, and triumphantly carry them into the confines of the hall. It is obvious that at such a pitch it no longer matters whether the passion is genuine or not. What the public wants is the image of passion, not passion itself. There's no more a problem of truth in wrestling than in theater. In both, what is expected is the intelligible representation of moral situations which are usually private. This emptying of interiority to the benefit of its exterior signs, this exhaustion of the content by the form, is the very principle of triumphant classical art. Wrestling is an immediate pantomime, infinitely more efficient than the dramatic pantomime, for the wrestler's gestures need no anecdote, no decor, in short, no transference, in order to appear true. Each moment in wrestling is therefore like an algebra which instantaneously unveils the relationship between a cause and its represented effect. Wrestling fans certainly experience a kind of intellectual pleasure in seeing the moral mechanism function so perfectly. Some wrestlers, who are great comedians, entertain as much as a Moliere character because they succeed in imposing an immediate reading of their inner nature. Armand Marzade, a wrestler of arrogant and ridiculous character, as one says that Harpagon is a character, always delights the audience by the mathematical rigor of his transcriptions, carrying the form of his gestures to the furthest reaches of their meaning, and giving to his manner of fighting the kind of vehemence and precision found in a great scholastic disputation, in which what is at stake is at once the triumph of pride and the formal concern with truth. That's the spirit, Rodrigo. A man of culture. Just pure aesthetic appreciation right there, completely philosophical. What is thus displayed for the public is the great spectacle of suffering, capital S, defeat, capital D, injustice, capital J. Wrestling presents man suffering with all the amplification of tragic masks. Okay, but have you, for those who are familiar with Japanese wrestling, it is pure theater, and it supersedes the idea of theater. It is constructed and beautiful, and there's like, it's just amazing. I'm thinking of, I think Mitsuki is the one whose entry I watched recently, and she has like this big furry wolf fox thing, and her wrestling costume is like this rainbow colored sparkly unitard, and I love it. The wrestler who suffers in a hold which is reputedly cruel, an arm lock, a twisted leg, offers an excessive portrayal of suffering. Like a primitive paeta, he exhibits all to see his face, exaggeratedly contorted by intolerable affliction. It is obvious, of course, that in wrestling reserve would be out of place, since it is opposed to the voluntary ostentation of the spectacle, to this exhibition of suffering which is the very aim of the fight. This is why all the actions which produce suffering are particularly spectacular, like the gesture of a conjurer who holds out his cards clearly to the public. I'm not sure why I'm stuttering so much tonight. I think it's because I'm anxious from school. Suffering which appeared without intelligible cause would not be understood. A concealed action that was actually cruel would transgress the unwritten rules of wrestling. It would have no more sociological efficacy than a mad or parasitic gesture. On the contrary, suffering appears as inflicted with the emphasis and conviction, for everyone must not only see that the man suffers, but also and above all understand why he suffers. What wrestlers call a hold, that is, any figure which allows one to immobilize the adversary indefinitely and to have him at one's mercy, he has precisely the function of preparing in a conventional, therefore intelligible fashion, the spectacle of suffering, of methodically establishing the conditions of suffering. The inertia of the vanquished allows the temporary victor to settle in his cruelty and to convey to the public this terrifying slowness of the torturer, who is certain about the outcome of his actions. Rodrigo, this is Roland Barthes' Mythologies. Oh, it may be reversed, but it's Roland Barthes' Mythologies. It's blue, if that helps. To grind the face of one's powerless adversary, or to scrape his spine with one's fist with a deep and regular movement, or at least to produce the superficial appearance of such gestures. I hate that word. Wrestling is the only sport which gives such an externalized image of torture. But here again, only the image is involved in the game, and the spectator does not wish for the actual suffering of the contestant. He only enjoys the perfection of iconography. It is not true that wrestling is a sadistic spectacle, it is only an intelligible spectacle. There is another figure, more spectacular still than a hold. It is the forearm smash. The loud slap of the forearm, this embryonic punch with which one clouts the chest of one's adversary, and which is accompanied by a dull noise and the exaggerated sagging of a vanquished body. In the forearm smash, catastrophe is brought to the point of maximum obviousness, so much so that ultimately the gesture appears as no more than a symbol. This is going too far. This is transgressing the moral rules of wrestling, where all signs must be excessively clear, but must not let intention of clarity be seen. The public then shouts, "He's laying it on!" Not because it regrets the absence of real suffering, but because it condemns artifice. As in the theatre, one fails to put the part across as much by an excess of sincerity as by an excess of formalism. We have already seen to what extent wrestlers exploit the resources of a given physical style, developed and put to use in order to unfold before the eyes of the public a total image of defeat, capital D. Defeat. The flaccidity of tall white bodies which collapse with one blow or crash into the ropes with arms flailing. The inertia of massive wrestlers rebounding pitiably off all the elastic surfaces of the ring. Nothing can signify more clearly and more passionately the exemplary abasement of the vanquished. Deprived of all resilience, the wrestler's flesh is no longer anything but an unspeakable heap spread out on the floor, where it solicits relentless reviling and jubilation. Here there is a paroxysm of meaning and style and of antiquity, which can only recall the heavy, underlined intentions and Roman triumphs. At other times there is another ancient posture which appears in the coupling of the wrestlers. Oh, this is good gay content. Did you guys know that Plato was a wrestler? He was jacked. That of the supplicant, who, at the mercy of his opponent, on bended knees, raises his arms above his head, is slowly brought down by the vertical pressure of the victor. In wrestling, unlike judo, I love how he's only comparing this to judo, even though grappling, the judo isn't the only you know what I mean. Defeat is not a conventional sign abandoned as soon as it is understood. It is not an outcome, but quite the contrary. It is a duration, a display. It takes up the ancient myths of public suffering. Capital S and capital H, humiliation. The cross and the pillory. It is as if the wrestler is crucified in broad daylight and in the sight of all. I have heard it said of a wrestler stretched on the ground, "He is dead, little Jesus, there on the cross." In these ironic words revealed the hidden roots of a spectacle which enacts the exact gestures of the most ancient purifications. But what wrestling is above all meant to portray is a purely moral concept, that of justice. He didn't use the capital J, justice. Barthe, come on. The idea of paying is essential to wrestling, and the crowd's "give it to him" means above all else, make him pay. This is therefore, needless to say, an imminent justice. The baser the action of the bastard, the more delighted the public is by the blow which he justly receives in return. If the villain... Gosh, I would love Barthe to do... Wait, is he still alive? Is he dead? Because I'd love for him to do an analysis of telenovelas. If the villain, who is of course a coward, takes refuge behind the ropes, claiming unfairly to have a right to do so by brazen mimicry, he's inexorably pursued there and caught, and the crowd is jubilant at seeing the rules broken for the sake of a deserved punishment. Wrestlers know very well how to play up to the capacity for indignation of the public by presenting the very limit of the concept of capital J justice, this outermost zone of confrontation where it is enough to infringe the rules for a little more to open the gates of a world without restraints. For a wrestling fan, I love how he hyphenates that. Wrestling fan. Nothing is finer than the revengeful fury of a betrayed fighter who throws himself vehemently? How is that pronounced? Not on a successful opponent, but on the smarting image of foul play. The Wolf Book is an LLM, and that will be when I have more emotional capacity to do it. It takes a lot of voices and tolerance. And for reference, what Juan is referring to is in a completely different group. I was doing a live stream reading of a weird self-published internet novel that's like a werewolf vampire romance in the vein of like Twilight, but exclusively werewolves. It's really bad. It was getting to some pretty dicey parts, and also I do it with a lot of voices, so I put it on pause. But I'll get back to it. Now that I have a better setup to do it, I will do it. I swear. I promise to you, Juan. Naturally, it is the pattern of justice, capital J, which matters here, much more than its content. Wrestling is above all a quantitative sequence of compensations, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This explains why sudden changes of circumstance have, in the eyes of wrestling habituate Jesus Christ, a sort of moral beauty. They enjoy them as they would enjoy an inspired episode in a novel, and the greater the contrast between the success of a move and the reversal of fortune, the nearer the good luck of a contestant to his downfall, the more satisfying the dramatic mime is felt to be. Justice is therefore the embodiment of a possible transgression. It is from the fact that there is a law that the spectacle of the passions which infringe it derives its value. It is therefore easy to understand why out of 5 wrestling matches, only about 1 is fair. What wrestling is he watching? He's not watching the good wrestling if that's the case. None are fair. There is no fairness in the theatricality of predestination. WWE is a microcosm of this mortal coil. One must realize, let it be repeated, that fairness here is a role or genre, as in the theater, that the rules do not at all constitute a real constraint, that they are the conventional appearance of fairness, so that in the actual fact a fair fight is nothing but an exaggeratedly polite one. The contestants confront each other with zeal, not rage. They can remain in control of their passions. They do not punish their beaten opponent relentlessly. They stop fighting as soon as they are ordered to do so. Congratulate each other at the end of a particularly arduous episode, during which, however, they have not ceased to be fair. One must, of course, understand here that all of these polite actions are brought to the notice of the public by the most conventional gestures of fairness. Shaking hands, raising the arms, ostensibly avoiding a fruitless hold which would detract from the perfection of the contest. Sorry, my bisexual ass has just started sitting in the chair very weirdly. Where did I leave? Conversely, foul play exists only in its excessive signs, administering a big kick to one's beaten opponent, taking refuge behind the ropes while ostensibly invoking a purely formal right, refusing to shake hands with one's opponent before or after the fight, taking advantage of the end of the round to rush treacherously at an adversary from behind, fouling him while I'm a 12-year-old boy. Fouling him while the referee is not looking, a move which obviously only has any value or function because, in fact, half of the audience can see it and get indignant about it. Since capital E, evil, is the natural climate of wrestling, a fair fight has chiefly the value of being an exception. It surprises the aficionado who greets it when he sees it as an anachronism rather than a sentimental throwback to the sporting tradition. Aren't they playing fair, those two? He feels suddenly moved at the sight of general kindness in the world, but would probably die of boredom and indifference if wrestlers did not quickly return to the orgy of evil, which alone makes good wrestling. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. Extrapolated, fair wrestling could lead only to boxing or to judo because there's only 2 times of grappling. Yeah. Whereas true wrestling derives its originality from all of the excesses which make it a spectacle and not a sport. The ending of a boxing match or a judo contest is abrupt, like the full stop which closes a demonstration. I kind of want to give him a nuggie at this point. I kind of want to give Barthe a swirly. Oh, hi, Cat. Cat! Hi! The rhythm of wrestling is quite different, for its natural meaning is that of rhetorical amplification, the emotional magniloquence, Jesus, the repeated paroxysm, the exasperation of the retorts, which can only find their natural outcome in the most baroque confusion. Some fights, among the most successful kind, are crowned by a final chivalry, a sort of unrestrained fantasia where the rules, the laws of the genre, the referee censoring, and the limits of the ring are abolished, swept away by a triumphant disorder which overflows into the hall and carries off the pell-mell wrestlers, seconds, referees, and spectators. It has already been noted in America that wrestling represents a sort of mythological fight between capital G good and evil of a quasi-political nature. The bad wrestler always supposed to be a red. Wasn't that like the Terminator or something? Dolph. Which movie was Dolph in? The process of... Was that Rocky? That was Rocky. The process of creating heroes in French wrestling is very different, being based on ethics and not in politics. What the public is looking for here is the gradual construction of a highly moral image, that of the perfect bastard. One comes to wrestling in order to attend to the continuing adventures of a single major leading character, permanent and multiform, like Punch or Scapino, inventive in unexpected figures and yet always faithful to his role. The bastard here is revealed as a Molière character or portrait by Le Bruyere, that is to say, as a classical entity, an essence whose acts are only significant epiphenomena arranged in time. The stylized character does not belong to any particular nation or party, whether that wrestler is called Kozinchenko, nicknamed Mustache after Stalin, your Gaspardi, Joe Vignola, or Noliere. The aficionado does not attribute him to any country except fairness, observing the rules. What then is the bastard for this audience is composed in part? We are told of a people who are themselves outside of the rules of society. Essentially, someone unstable who accepts the rules only when they are useful to him and transgresses the formal continuity of attitudes. He is unpredictable, therefore asocial. He takes refuge behind the law when he considers that it is in his favor and breaks it when he finds it useful to do so. Sometimes he rejects the formal boundaries of the ring and goes on hitting an adversary legally protected by the ropes. Sometimes he reestablishes the boundaries and claims the protection of what he did not respect a few minutes earlier. And sometimes he grabs a chair. That's me. Barthe didn't say that. I said that. A folding chair. This inconsistency, far from more than treachery or cruelty, sends the audience beside itself with rage. Offended not in its morality, but in its logic. It considers the contradiction of arguments as the basest of crimes. The forbidden moves becomes dirty only when it destroys a quantitative equilibrium and disturbs the rigorous reckoning of compensations. What is condemned by the audience is not all the transgression of insipid official rules. It is the lack of revenge, the absence of punishment. So that there is nothing more exciting for a crowd than the grandiloquent kick given to a vanquished bastard. One joy of punishing is at its climax when it is supported by a mathematical justification. Contempt it is then unrestrained. One is no longer dealing with a salade, but with a salope, the verbal gesture of the ultimate degradation. Such a precise finality demands that wrestling should be exactly what the public expects of it. Wrestlers who are very experienced know how to direct the spontaneous episodes of the fight so as to make it conform to the image which the public has of the great legendary themes of its mythology. A wrestler can irritate or disgust. He never disappoints, for he always accomplishes completely by a progressive solidification of signs what the public expects of him. In wrestling, nothing exists except in the absolute. There is no symbol, no illusion. Everything is presented exhaustively. Leaving nothing in the shade, each action discards all parasitic meanings and ceremonially offers to the public a pure and full signification, rounded like nature. That's a good question. I mean, I had to go on break because of COVID, but I do martial arts, and I know there's a couple other uh, martial arts practitioners, specifically grappling. I do BJJ and Krav, but I do know there's a couple other people who do BJJ in this group, and I think that's probably as closest as one will get in terms of the actual physicality of what he's describing, if not definitely not the theatrical scope, but I would like to talk to a lucha libre wrestler about this. That would be fun. What is portrayed by wrestling is therefore an ideal understanding of things. It is the euphoria of men raised for a while above the constitutive ambiguity of everyday situations and placed before the panoramic view of an univocal nature, in which signs at last correspond to causes without obstacle, without evasion, without contradiction. When the hero, or the villain of the drama, the man who was seen a few minutes earlier possessed by a moral rage, magnified into a sort of metaphysical sign, leaves the wrestling hall, impassive, anonymous, carrying a small suitcase and arm in arm with his wife. Oh, this is so sweet. No one can doubt that wrestling holds the power of transmutation, which is common to the spectacle, into religious, capital R, worship, capital W. In the ring, even in the depths of the voluntary ignominy, wrestlers remain gods because they are, and for a few moments, the key which opens nature, the pure gesture which separates good from evil, unveils the form of a justice which is at last intelligible. I was originally going to do wine and milk from this one, but I'm not feeling it at this exact moment. Let me see. It's been a while. I'm going to do the brain of Einstein. That's fun. Einstein's brain is a mythical object. Paradoxically, the greatest intelligence of all provides an image of the most up-to-date machine, the man who is too powerful and too removed, is removed from psychology and introduced into the world of robots. As is well known, the supermen of science fiction always have something reified about them. Oh, this is boring. Never mind. I thought that this one was more exciting. He has a couple really weird ones in here. Oh, he has one. That's right. He has one of the Citroën. I love those cars. I don't drive a car, but if I did, I would like it to be a Citroën. Oh, let's do plastic. I like plastic. Plastic, Roland Barthes. Despite having names of Greek shepherds, polystyrene, polyvinyl, polyethylene, plastic, the products of which have just been gathered in an exhibition, is in essence the stuff of alchemy. At the entrance of the stand, the public waits in a long queue in order to witness the accomplishment of the magical operation par excellence, the transmutation of matter. An ideally shaped machine, tubulated and oblong, a shape well suited to suggest the secret of an itinerary, effortlessly draws out of a heap of greenish crystal shiny in fluted dressing room tidies. At one end, raw telluric matter, at the other, the finished human object, and between these two extremes, nothing. Nothing but a transit, hardly watched over by an attendant in a cloth cap, half god, half robot. So, more than substance, plastic is the very idea of its infinite transformation. As its everyday name indicates, it is ubiquity made visible. And it is this, in fact, which makes it a miraculous substance. A miracle is always a sudden transformation of nature. Plastic remains impregnated throughout this wonder. It is less of a thing than the trace of a movement. And as the movement here is almost infinite, transforming the original crystals into a multitude of more and more startling objects, plastic is, all told, a spectacle to be deciphered, the very spectacle of its end products. At the sight of each terminal form, suitcase, brush, car body, toy, fabric, tube, basin, or paper, the mind does not cease from considering the original matter as an enigma. This is because the quick change artistry of plastic is absolute. It can become buckets as well as jewels. Hence a perpetual amazement, the reverie of a man at the sight of the proliferating forms of matter, and the connections he detects between the singular of the origin and the plural of the effects. And this amazement is a pleasurable one, since the scope of the transformations gives man the measure of his power, and since the very itinerary of plastic gives him the euphoria of a prestigious freewheeling through nature. This is depressing. I don't think the turtles are prestigiously freewheeling through nature anymore. But the price to be paid for this excess is that plastic, sublimated as movement, hardly exists as substance. Its reality is a negative one, neither hard nor deep. It must be content with a substantial attribute which is neutral in spite of its utilitarian advantages. Resistance, a state which merely means an absence of yielding. In the hierarchy of the major poetic substances, it figures as a disgraced material lost between the effusiveness of rubber and the flat hardness of metal. It embodies none of the genuine produce of the mineral world. It embodies none of the... foam. It embodies none of the genuine produce of the mineral world, foam, fiber, strata. It is a shape substance. Whatever its final state, plastic keeps a flocculent appearance, something opaque, creamy, and curdled, something powerless ever to achieve the triumphant smoothness of nature. But what best reveals it for what it is the sound it gives, at once hollow and flat. Its noise is its undoing, as are its colors, for it seems capable of retaining only the most chemical-looking ones. Of yellow, red, and green it only keeps the aggressive quality, and uses them as mere names, of being able to display only concepts of colors. The fashion for plastic highlights an evolution in the myth of imitation materials. It is well known that their use is historically bourgeois in origin. The first vestimentary postiche. What the hell am I reading? I'm sorry. I just had a bit of a stroke. Vestimentary postiches date back to the rise of capitalism. But until now, imitation materials have always indicated pretension. They belong to the world of appearances, not to that of actual use. They aimed at reproducing cheaply the rare substances, diamonds, silk, feathers, furs, silver, and all of the luxurious brilliance of the world. Plastic has climbed down. It is a household material. It is the first magical substance which consents to be prosaic. But it is precisely because of this prosaic character is a triumphant reason for its existence. For the first time, artifice aims at something common, not rare, and as an immediate consequence, the age-old function of nature is modified. It is no longer the idea, the pure substance to be regained or imitated, an artificial matter, more bountiful than all of the natural deposits, is about to replace her and to determine its very invention of forms. A luxurious object is still of this earth. It still recalls, albeit in a precious mode, its mineral or animal origin, the natural theme of which it is but one actualization. Plastic is wholly swallowed up in the fact that of being used. Ultimately, objects will be invented for the sole pleasure of using them. This hierarchy of substances is abolished. A single one replaces them all. The whole world can be plasticized, and even life itself, since we are told they are beginning to make plastic aortas. Sounded a bit Nick Land right there, Barthe. Oh yeah, okay, so he did die in 1980. Poor man. He wasn't able to see the final form of his theatrical construction. Well, let me put it this way, his hyper-analysis of theatrical wrestling. I think he would have approved of all of the speedos, so to speak, and also just the general artistry of it all. God, I love wrestling. I used to have a bit of a hobby where my insomnia show was Ring of Honor on public access television. Anyway, thank you for spending the evening with me. I really do need to get back to work. I am glad to have brought back the Cozy Corner. I can't make any promises on schedule because things are kind of crazy right now, and it's also a pandemic, and I'm also kind of in a bit of a sad girl mode right now. But I really enjoyed this. I'm glad to be back to some degree. I will be doing weekly uploads of pre-recorded material on my YouTube channel, which I guess I will edit into the description link. And I suppose that's all I have to update you on. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, guys, and I hope you're all safe. I hope you're all well. Good night from your Philbook Doomer GF, and take care.